Well, welcome everyone to the second in a series of McCarthy and Cox webinars following the election. Today, our webinar is titled, "The Election's Over, Now What? Politics." And before we get too far, I do need to recognize that we've received several emails from our clients reminding us that the election technically isn't over, that there's a process playing out, that the votes have not been certified, and that is technically correct. But I think as we look ahead to the future, the political landscape in this country has changed, and we're today going to hear from an expert in that area. Susan Olson comes to us from Natixis, which is a major money managing firm. She is the Senior Vice President of Government Relations, headquartered out of Washington, D.C., and her role is to keep track of changing legislative priorities and the politics in our country. I don't want to take too much time introducing her because she has a lot of information to share, but I would point out as the presentation plays out, on your screen there should be a little box for you to ask a question. Please submit any questions or concerns you have. They'll be fed to me. And when Susan is done with her presentation, we will do our best to get to as many of those questions as possible. So with that, Susan, welcome. We really appreciate you being here. We've had the pleasure of hearing you speak before. We've been impressed, and I know you're going to share a lot of great insights today. So welcome, and thank you for being here.
Well, thank you so much, Tom. I'm very glad to be here with you. It is, the post-election season is probably even more stressful than the pre-election season, to be sure. So today I just want to share with you some of our thoughts on, where the election is, but then, also, what are some of the policies going forward from a Biden administration, and if President Trump were to officially lose the re-election, what do we expect him to do the last couple months in office? So I also want to touch on where Congress is, what their agenda is going through the end of the year, which there aren't very many days before their legislative calendar is over, and they have a lot to do. And want to talk about the Senate and the House. So, like Tom said, there are a lot of things to talk about. So again, now I am using my presentation from pre-election. It will suffice for our conversation. Trying to put my presentation together for what I want. It's too early to find a lot of the data. And so we're just gonna kind of go through this. I'm going to skip over this, so skip over the congressional part for now. And so, we can talk about where we are right now with the election. And as some of the clients have pointed out, it is not officially over. The President Trump and his team, along with the Republican National Committee, and or RNC, as well as a lot of individuals, have filed in between 30 and 40 lawsuits in 5 different states. Those are Pennsylvania, Michigan, Georgia, Arizona, and Nevada. And the lawsuits range from improper counting, from mail-in voter identification, observer access, provisional ballots, postmarks on mail-in ballots, just countless, a lot. So far, the lawsuits the ones that have already been settled or dismissed have not been in the president's favor. They did win the one in Pennsylvania where the observers could move up to 6 feet. But the rest are still out there. It's going to be tough. I'm just going to, be honest with you. If we compare this to 2000, when we had the Gore-Bush contested election, just to put into perspective, that was one state with a difference of 500 votes. Here, we are talking about 5 states and 250,000 or more total votes that they would need to overturn. And, you know, according to 538, which is a political website, or excuse me, Fair Vote, since 2000, there have been 31 statewide recounts and only 3 actually overturned the results. And those margins of those 3 was 390 votes, 239 votes, and 400 votes. So it is an uphill climb, and you know, but they are going to press forward. There are still some tomorrow. I think you might have seen yesterday. Rudy Giuliani argued in the courts in Pennsylvania, and you know that there was a mass conspiracy by the Democrats in the larger cities, metropolitan cities in these 5 states, and wants to overturn about 1.5 million ballots in Pennsylvania. Tomorrow, the judge was not, had a lot of questions, but they are going to evidentiary hearing tomorrow. And so we'll see. And that's, you know, just to let you know what the courts are looking for. In order to make a case, you know, you need a claim, you need evidence, and then you need a remedy. And specifically with the relief, you cannot support requests for relief that extend far beyond the scope of the claim. So so we'll see. You know, it's it's going to be tough. He needs to flip 3 of these 5 states in order to get to 270. So anything is always possible, but it's going to be very, very tough. So I know we'll probably have, I'm going to leave it at that, okay? I know we're going to have questions later. I already have some other questions, but that's just the broad scope of what they're up against. Another strategy is that they are trying to stop electors from certifying the results. And the strategy behind this is if they were to stop them from certifying the votes by their state's deadline, then they would either one of 2 things: either it would go to the House of Representatives to decide, or they would be if it was a Republican legislation, which, by the way, in the Rust Belt, I think in all but Nevada, they are Republican legislatures. All 5 of the 5 states, all except for Nevada, have Republican legislatures. And then they would assign their own electors, pro-Trump electors, to cast their electoral ballots for Trump, even if their district voted for Biden. So again, an extreme long shot. I think this would be extremely disruptive if they put in what they call faithless electors to vote for President Trump, even if the district voted for Biden. That scares us a lot. I think that would lead to a lot of protests and be very controversial. But those are some of the other ways that they are trying to stop and recount the election. So, you know, as far as what President Trump, I would not expect him to ever concede to the election results. He might accept them, but to call Biden and congratulate him, even inviting Joe, President-elect and the First Lady-elect over to the White House before inauguration, like we saw other presidents do, including President Trump and First Lady Melania over to Obama's. I don't believe you'd see that, but maybe he would, and then we can talk about some of the other parts to that, because when we talk about Georgia, because this does kind of go into Georgia, but we don't expect him to do that. So as far as I'm going to use this slide for policies for his next term. to talk about if he were to not be reelected and would have to leave office at noon on January 20th. That he has 2 months left. What do you think, he would do in the meantime? And first of all, on taxes, they might try to push for tax extenders, and also to possibly make the tax cuts from the individual tax cuts from the Tax Cut and Jobs Act of 2017, make them permanent. I know that even Republicans would like to do this, but right now Congress has, as I mentioned, a very, very full plate, and they have to get the budget figured out by December 11th. And they also have to figure out what they're going to do around COVID relief. Both of these issues, I just got off another phone call about this, are still very much in the air. So the one way to get those tax extenders done or make the individual tax cuts permanent would be to put it on, if they were to do a large omnibus to pass the budget, they would probably attach it to that. So I know that's one thing they would like to do. Foreign policy, we've already seen one move, an executive order, was it last Friday of last week, where it's the China investment, I'm forgetting the exact name of it, the China investment order. Basically what that's saying is that they're going to delist companies from the markets that have communist ties to them, and they've identified 37 companies, and they did put in the executive order to extend that to more companies. As far as the asset management community, my company, Natixis, we have about $1 trillion of assets under management with we have an affiliate-based structure, which means we have independent money managers around the world. And so far, we do not see us being affected by it. I think more of because we do mostly active management. We do 99% active management. So active managers probably wouldn't impact them as much. I know some of my colleagues, government relations colleagues from some of the bigger index providers, they're really looking into this, but frankly, outside of the asset management community, this frankly has bipartisan and bicameral support. I mean, maybe not 100% from each party, but this is something that would not be hugely contested by our legislators on Capitol Hill, because one of the main reason President Trump issued this executive order is because of national security. So we do expect this to come in or to maybe even stay in play. What else he has around China, we don't know. We also know, there has been talk about bombing Iran. I asked my foreign policy experts last night if that would come to fruition, and it definitely has been put on the table, but it's being kind of left at that. We don't think that's going to happen. We also know that he wants to pull out all the soldiers in Afghanistan except for 2,500. The Pentagon and Republicans are not in favor of this, but this is a promise that he made when he ran for office. So, we do think he will move forward with this. And Iraq, we do think that he'll make a move with Iraq as well. So, definitely have some more foreign policy measures on there. And so, again, we all just have to kind of wait and see, just like, he fired someone yesterday and that person and everybody else found out exactly how we did through his tweets. So we'll stay tuned. We do expect more from that. But like I said, as far as investments, the China policy, active managers, we're not wringing our hands over that. It doesn't affect us because we have a lot more control over what we put in our portfolios. We don't have to follow the benchmark, where if you are following the benchmark, that could pose a problem. But again, not my wheelhouse because I'm active management, but that is something they're thinking of. Healthcare. We know that the president, he despises the pharmaceutical industry. So we do think that he will potentially go after prescription drugs. And, the pharmaceutical industry ran very harsh ads against him this fall. And possibly this week, we could see, and it's Wednesday, that we could see regulations that would lower prices for Medicare drugs to match cheaper prices in other countries. So be on the lookout for that. It looks like the Affordable Care Act, that went in front of the Supreme Court last week on November the 10th, and there was, a lot of concern around if it would, or concern or questions, whichever word you want to use there, if you like it or dislike it, about what the Supreme Court would do, because it went in front of the Supreme Court to vacate the mandates around individual health care. And so if they deem those unconstitutional, then yes, the ACA would essentially be vacated. And if that were to pass, then it would probably, I think June is when they're going to put their final brief out on that. But there would have to be a replacement. On energy and health and climate change, so he is opening up before he leaves. He is opening up the Arctic Wildlife Reserve for drilling and perhaps granting licenses just before the January 20th inauguration. And in recent weeks, there have been new Trump regulatory reform proposals for labor standards, emissions, et cetera. So we can think that in the next 2 months, he will, like I said, he wants to open up drilling in the Arctic and roll back some labor and emission standards. And why you do that now, especially through executive order, and then, the thing is, with an executive order, which is how these would get done, President-elect Joe Biden would immediately reverse, or once he is president, would immediately reverse many of those regulations. But we can look for something on that. Other issues, we do think that we will have more firings. You probably saw yesterday that he fired the head of the cybersecurity for elections. So he is, if he sees disloyalty around anybody in his administration, we do think that he will fire them. We think we'll see more firings at the Pentagon, the CIA, the FBI, Department of Homeland Security, and nobody is safe right now. Even Attorney General William Barr, everyone is kind of up for grabs right now. So that's about, I think that's probably a lot. Oh, and very important, pardons. That we think he'll do a lot of pardons on the way out the door. And it's possible that he will pardon General Michael Flynn, Paul Manafort, some others that got it, were sentenced during his administration. But the big issue is he going to try to pardon himself and his family. They are worried about being tied up in litigation around some of the policies during his presidency. So that's never happened before. So his legal team is trying to figure that out. Some other legal scholars are trying to figure that out. But if he did, it could inoculate him from federal charges, but it would not inoculate him from state charges. So, for example, the Southern District of New York is going after him for his tax returns. He would not be inoculated from that. However, the state charges versus federal, his legal team would probably be able to fight those state charges a lot easier than they would the federal. So we'll see. But we do think pardons, Bill Clinton had 140 pardons on his final day, and it would not be out of the range of possibility that he would top that number. So anyway, so just some of the things that we are looking for. So where does that leave Biden and Harris? So they are pushing forward with their agenda. He is starting up a COVID task force. But they are being hamstrung because the election has not been officially called. And so they're waiting for the GSA to officially release the or call him president. And if you, the GSA, if you want to know what they do, think of them as the office administrator, that they are the ones that help you get, help approve people if, going through they open up, well, first they open up there's funding for a presidential transition to help move through the process. And it gives you they basically are the ones who file the key cards, get your email addresses set up. They help put you through the process, or allow you to go through the process to get some of your new staff vetted by the FBI. And so, so that's hamstringing them, or that, so it's kind of holding them up a little bit, but they're still moving forward. And the one issue, though, that a couple issues that are especially challenging right now is he's not receiving the national security briefs. And with President Trump moving forward on some of these geopolitical issues, it is important that as soon as possible that he receive those. So, and then also yesterday there was a letter to the president from all the major medical trades and institutions, really wanting to give Joe Biden this access, so that if he becomes president, that he would have a smooth transition in order to start his COVID task force. So it is challenging right now, but they are moving forward. Their transition teams are being set up here in DC. And what a transition team does as well is, there are dozens of agencies in Washington DC and around the country. And within these agencies, they literally have huge rooms set up where their transition team comes in to work with, especially not just the career staff and the presidential appointees, who will be leaving after his administration, in order to make a smooth transition. So, they're ready for that, and the agencies are ready for that. So if he does officially become president of the United States, then they will move forward with that. As far as some of his policies on China, we don't think he's going to roll back a lot of what the president did with China, because frankly, the Democrats have been wanting to initiate a lot of the policies that President Trump did for years. And so when President Trump started to, go after China for their unfair trade practices, their intellectual property theft, etc. What he did, he outlefted the left on that. So we don't think that he's going to unwind a lot of that. There was some talk that maybe he would unwind the last round of tariffs that went into effect. I think it's been a year now. However, a lot of promises with that last round of tariffs were made by the Chinese to our farmers. I believe it's that they would buy $30 billion. And so if it seems like that unwinding that tariff would take away that, China's promise to buy $30 billion worth of our agricultural goods, I don't know that they do it, but we don't think that they would put any more tariffs on. What we think will change, though, with China is, number one, that would be more transparent. As I mentioned before, with when President Trump makes a decision, we all find out at the same time, and that China was no exception. When he made his decisions on tariffs, on other factors behind this China policy, his trade advisors and economic advisors largely found out, as we did, through his tweets. Well, what that translates into the markets is that it's uncertain. It's uncertainty, and the markets go up and down, not based upon whether the president is blue or red, but certainty and uncertainty. And so a China policy under Biden would be a lot more certain for the markets, that it would be more transparent and much more planned out. The other thing is, even though it looked like we basically kind of went at this at China alone, we are not the only country that feels China's unfair trade practices and etc. Europe does, Japan does, Australia does. We all feel it. China does not pick on the United States for that. They do it to anyone around the world. So we'd probably bring in some allies and have a little more power behind that China policy. Plus, frankly, the world is pretty upset at China right now about COVID. That is not a Trump claim. That is not a Republican claim. That is not a United States claim. That China, was very irresponsible with COVID. The world feels this way, especially our allies over in Europe and Japan and Australia. So we do think that would be different. Now, taxes, there's a lot of talk around taxes, what he would, he wants to raise taxes on corporates and individuals. But if the Senate stays Republican, and we'll talk about that in a minute, he would not be able to really get much of that done, except for possibly within an infrastructure package, which is the next. So I have a 10-year $3 trillion, it's more like 10-year $2 trillion, but he does have an infrastructure plan. And we do believe that this would be one of the first things, as long as Congress can get done what they need to get done this year with the budget and COVID relief, and not roll that into next year to once again open up and have to muddy those waters. If they can get Congress to get that done this year and start fresh next year, and this is for any administration, this is not Biden this is for whoever, but that they would want to do an infrastructure package. And the Republicans want to do that too. Of course, their numbers are different. The Republicans are more around $1 trillion, Democrats around $2 trillion. Boy, that sounds familiar, doesn't it? So, and maybe he could get a tax hike through with that. But otherwise, if it's a Republican Senate, his tax plan is not going to go anywhere. Now, even if the Democrats do win both the seats in Georgia, and it's a 50-50 split in the Senate with the vice president casting the tie vote, they would have to do their tax plan through what's called reconciliation. And that is, they would attach that language to the next budget, and they would be able to pass it with 51 votes. So without getting into the weeds, that's how they would pass it. That's how they passed the 2017 TCJA. That's how they passed the Bush tax cuts. That's how they passed the Affordable Care Act. That's usually how they pass everything, is through reconciliation, where the Senate would only need 50 votes plus the vice president's vote to do that. But that would be if they pass the budget by December 11th. They would have to use the 2022 budget, which would be a little further down the line. But so we'll see what happens with that. Again, going back to the Affordable Care Act, even before the Supreme Court rules on the Affordable Care Act, which I mentioned, we think would be kind of early summerish, late springish, May, June. I think he would already start to work on some of the flaws in the Affordable Care Act and really try to tighten that up. And he would have Republican support on that. And he too would want to go, work on prescription pricing. We do think right away when it comes to climate that he will re-enter the Paris Climate Agreement. He would probably do that immediately. And he would reinstate a lot of the regulation on the fossil fuel industry that was rolled back. I just mentioned, some of that drilling. He would roll that back, and also, put some more environmental protections on. And then finally, on race relations, that we do believe that whatever policy he puts forth, that he will keep race relations at the top of mind. And if the policy addresses jobs or healthcare, economics, housing, that we will, if we see him, have something written in there to address some of the inequalities around these issues. So that's kind of where we see that. So again, this is kind of old, so let's move on. So as far as the House, this blue sweep that was supposed to come through certainly did not take hold with the exception of potentially Biden being elected president, and that being very competitive at this point. However, you know, the Democratic House thought that they were going to pick up at least another 10 seats. Frankly, they were looking at more like 15 to 20, and they lost 10 seats. So the blue wave did not happen in the House. In fact, it's going to today. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi was nominated for another term, as long as her the other leadership, Steny Hoyer, her number 2, and Jim Clyburn, her number 3. So they will be back in the big seats again next year. But she's going to have a tougher time because she's going to have a much more narrow margin in the House. So you need 200, there are 435 seats in the House, and so you need 218 for majority, and in the House you only need simple majority to pass a bill, unlike the Senate where you need a threshold of 60 votes. So we're looking at a very narrow margin. I want to say the Republicans have about 209. They'll end up with around 209, and which would give the Democrats 224. So I mean, we're talking razor, or 226. That razor thin. Why that's important is because she's going to have a lot of progressives there, and to move anything forward in this Congress is going to have to be more centrist. And if, you know, some of these progressives do not think that the bills go far enough, they will vote against them. So it is going to be very important that she receive Republican support, which is going to be good for the Republicans because it'll give them much more power and much more negotiation power, which means that the House will have to negotiate with the Republicans in order to get some of these bills passed. So I think in the House too, you know, I saw this last year before, kind of about a year ago, last October, right before impeachment, kind of that summer leading up to that. You really started to hear about the fractures in the Democratic Party on the progressives versus the moderates. But then that was quieted when the impeachment process began, and then it was really quieted when we got closer to the elections. And they, you know, the progressives and the moderates had to work together in order to get a candidate elected. The progressives found that out the hard way in 2016 when they boycotted the election because they were upset about Bernie Sanders not getting the nomination, which arguably cost Hillary Clinton the election. So this year they realized that half a loaf is better than none. But they are already coming out very strong to the Biden administration, saying that we got you elected, now you owe us. So that's going to be very interesting to see how that plays out. And it's going to start really playing out in the House first. So going back to what I say, this fracture from the word go after the 2018 midterm elections, so all of 2019 going into most of 2020, Nancy Pelosi, she had her hands full keeping these two groups at bay, and they have very differing ideas on where the Democratic Party should go. They have differing opinions on why they lost so many seats. The progressives say that it's because they didn't go progressive enough, where the moderates, including Jim Clyburn, who gave a very animated interview that I saw after the election, saying that the progressives cost them elections because of this. He calls it sloganism, I think. Things like defunding the police, that you are not going to win a moderate American over with slogans like defunding the police. And so you're going to see that battle really wage on in the House. So which takes us to the Senate. And frankly, well, first on the Senate. So the Democrats thought that they could take the Senate back. As you can see from these competitive House races, you know, there were seven senators in toss-up races. There were 3 that were in what we call lean Republican, which are still very competitive races, but that Republican did have the advantage. And then two senators who are an actually lean Democrat where the race was actually in the Democratic challenger's favor. The Democrats only had one seat that was vulnerable, and he got killed or got smothered, was in Alabama, Jones, who lost to Tubby Tuberville in Alabama. So the only two races that the Republicans lost were those lean Democratic, in Arizona and Colorado. So they only won those two Republican seats, and they lost the one Alabama seat. So they only netted one, and they really thought they were going to net about no less than 4, almost as many as 7. So, what happened? Again, this goes back to that, what did happen is, I think the general feeling is that the Republicans who did not want to see Donald Trump get reelected also did not want to see a largely progressive agenda go through. And so, yes, they may have crossed the ballot and ballot party line and voted for Biden, but they voted for their Republican senator and House members as well. So, again, the progressives would argue that it's because they didn't go progressive enough. But I think if you look at these states, Iowa, Maine, Montana, North Carolina, South Carolina, those aren't necessarily your most progressive states. So chances are you saw certain demographics cross party lines to vote for Biden. Specifically, suburban women. We think a lot of back in 2016, suburban women supported President Trump over Hillary Clinton, or Donald Trump at the time, by 20 points, 20 points, 50, not quite that, 10 points, about 55 to 45, excuse me, 55 to 45. Now he's down by 20 points. So he only has about 35% support from suburban women. So we think a lot of it came from that. The other area where, President Trump was pulling down compared to a lot of presidents was seniors. And so we think kind of the same thing with seniors, that they crossed party lines and voted for Biden, but went back to the party when it came time to vote down the rest of the ballot. So now, we are at the Republicans have secured 50 seats and the Democrats have 48. They started with 47. I mentioned they netted 1. So as we know, both the Georgia seats are up for or are going into a runoff race. And just real quick to go explain what a runoff race is in Georgia and about 7 other states. If the candidate does not receive 50% plus 1 vote, literally plus 1 vote, not 51%, 50 plus 1 vote, they have to go into a runoff election. And in the case of both the Loeffler and the Perdue, there were, I think the Loeffler race, I think there were close to a dozen people running on that ticket. Perdue, I think at least a half a dozen. And so what happens is the 2 candidates who receive the most votes, the number 1 and number 2, go into a runoff. So all the other candidates are, they've lost. And so now it's between these 2. And both Loeffler and Perdue did make that. So that runoff election is going to be held on January 5th. The Georgia rules state that it has to happen 9 weeks after the election, which would make it on the 5th. So what do we think is going to happen? Democrats were very successful in getting people and getting people registered to vote, getting the Democratic vote out, and it was pretty impressive. And that they are, it's right now they're recounting their ballots. They'll be done on Friday in Georgia, and that it came so close with these races. However, the Democrats they're going to have to keep on building on this momentum, because in runoff races in general, or in off-cycle elections, Republicans are much more reliable voters than what Democrats are, especially when you look at certain demographics. So just to give you an example, in 2008, Barack Obama narrowly lost Georgia, and the Republican incumbent Senator Saxby Chambliss finished ahead of his Democratic challenger by 3% on election day. That race went into a runoff, and in the runoff, he won by 15%. Turnout was down more than 40% in that state. And the other two Senate races that went into runoffs in 1992, that turnout was down by 44%, and then again, I mentioned in 2008. And, and then there are some other state elections that I won't bore you with, but all of those turnouts were down anywhere from 43 to 91%. That was for a public service commissioner. But what the point is here that the Democrats are going to have to keep that momentum going, and the Republicans are going to have to work hard at this as well. So, there is. So right now you don't have a lot of Republicans coming out and saying, no, President Trump, you haven't won, we need to put this to bed because, first of all, we don't know that for sure yet, but because they don't know where they need him for Georgia, and what they don't want him to do, that they cannot afford for him to do, is to tweet out to his supporters saying, don't vote because elections are rigged. And that's already a concern, that especially a lot of our rural voters are not going to trust elections in general, but especially for this Georgia election, since it's so fresh, and not show up. And so they can't have an angry President Trump tweeting out to not go and vote in those Georgia elections. So this kind of can explain why you have a lot of Republicans who are hesitating and even congratulating Joe Biden. And they don't know whether or not they're going to have President Trump down there to campaign or not, because maybe you've seen, some of the, pre-polling and exit polling that a lot of Democrats cast their vote, or people in general, not just Democrats, cast their vote against President Trump as opposed to for Joe Biden. And so sending Trump down to Georgia might help the Democrats and energize their base and getting them. So they don't know where they are with that. But we do think that Mike Pence is going to go down there as well. So I've kind of probably talked longer than I wanted to. I'm sorry. I think I've answered some of the questions. And I'll just go over some of these that were sent to me ahead of time. One was about the Georgia. The Georgia runoff election. What is the likely outcome of those? So as far as the likely outcome, frankly, I think it's you either win one or both. I don't think it's going to be split. If you're voting for Republican, you're voting for both. If you're voting for Democrat, you're voting for both. And then, I talked about a little bit about how likely it is that his agenda gets done, or then the question is, how likely is Biden's agenda going to get passed? I did talk about that a little bit, but just to reemphasize, if the Democrats were to win both of those seats and have majority, the only way that the Democrats can really pass anything is by doing reconciliation instructions onto the budget resolution, which you only get one of those a year. So only one big thing a year, and you only get one bite at the apple. If it doesn't work, too bad. You don't get to put a different set of reconciliation instructions onto the budget resolution. So it's still going to be very tough. And I mentioned the House too. If they don't think Biden's policy, if the progressives don't think Biden's policies are going far enough, it's going to take like 10 of them not to vote to not pass anything. So it's still going to be very difficult. We talked about the blue wave. And then how will the election results affect Democrats' policy initiatives and ability to get most of the progressive parts? So this is what I was going to mention, and this is my opinion. Biden is, this part is not, you might not believe this or not, but in DC, this is he is a centrist politician. And I mentioned how the progressives were going to put a lot of demands on the Biden administration. But if Biden has a Senate, a Republican Senate, that might be the best gift he has against the progressive agenda. Because Mitch McConnell has already said, don't even think about putting up a progressive candidate or a cabinet, because we're not even going to put them up to vote. So if he puts someone like Bernie Sanders up for labor secretary, well, okay, there is a caveat between Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. Republicans would not want necessarily Bernie Sanders running labor or Elizabeth Warren as Treasury Secretary. However, Both of those are Democrats, right? Well, one's an independent, but both of them are in states that have Republican governors. And so their replacements would be governors. So that's your caveat there, is that, like, sure, go ahead, because now we are going to have majority and we're going to have, more seats in the Senate. So those are some caveats there. But on the other parts, it is going to, Biden will be able to say, hey, we've got this Republican Senate. I can't get, all your progressive policies passed. So Medicare for all, Green New Deal, he wants to protect the ACA. Green New Deal, he does not want to do the Green New Deal in its entirety. The Green New Deal is impossible from a cost standpoint, for one. There are elements, kind of watered down, he is going to address climate change, but not to that degree. Defunding the police, he's not going to defund the police regardless. But yeah, so I think it's going to, help them. The next one was, who do you see as the biggest winners and losers? I think I already went over that. How likely will President Biden, pack the Supreme Court? Again, he's a Senate institutionalist. We've never had a president with as much Senate experience as we have Joe Biden. And that kind of goes in with, why he and Mitch McConnell could potentially work together. Mitch McConnell is not a warm and fuzzy dude. He doesn't even have a lot of Republican BFFs. But he does like Joe Biden, and in fact, he talked about it in his autobiography about that. So, stuff like stacking the Supreme Court, getting rid of the filibuster. If Joe Biden, with his Senate institutionalist background, he's not for either of these measures. So that's not going to be at the top of his list. And again, especially if there's a Republican Senate, those issues are off the table. The next question, will the District of Columbia and Puerto Rico be granted statehood? Nope, they will not. They won't. And should we, they're not going to get, even if the House, which the House did pass, a bill to make Washington, D.C. a state. As I mentioned before, once it gets to the Senate, they need 60 votes, and they are not going to they can't. The only thing you could put reconciliation instructions on the budget is if it affects the budget. Maybe they can make an argument for DC and Puerto Rico statehood, but that they are not going to get any Republicans to go along with that. Income tax overhaul, we talked about that, that it would not happen unless he had a Democratic Senate, and it would probably happen a little bit later in the year. But I think this question is too, is it retroactive? No, I do not believe it'll be retroactive. They seldom are, and there would really not be, it'd be too difficult because a lot of these, especially with the corporate tax rate going from 21 to 28, it's very difficult from a tech, from a process and operational standpoint. So we believe that it would be effective January 1, 2022. So with Donald Party, he reframed the Republican Party. Could not agree with you more. While he will no longer likely be president, do you expect him to go quietly into the night, or do you think he will continue on the national stage? I do not expect President Trump, even if he's former President Trump, to go quietly into the night. He has a base that is unbelievable. Even if he loses the election, he has more than 73 million people vote for him. He has over 90 million Twitter followers. He has supporters who are unbreakable, and he's just not going to walk away from that. He's already talking about running in 2024. I don't know about that. If he actually would, it's 4 years away. And now we're still talking about this election. You're going to give me ulcers if we have to talk about the 2024 election already. But I think he will hold this over the Republicans' head, if you will. I mentioned that the Republicans are not speaking out against him on this because they know how important of a figure he is going to be. He is. And there is talk about how he can catapult this success and his following into post the after the presidency. And we do believe that he's looking at buying a television station like OAN, a news station, or doing a streaming channel, which that would be cheaper, but we won't get in the mechanics of that, in order to keep his message out there. We think that his family will probably enter, especially Don Jr., maybe even Ivanka, even Eric has gotten into the fold. So we think that we will continue to see the Trump family going forward, and he will absolutely be on the national stage. His power over the first sentence in there is absolutely Donald Trump reframed the Republican Party. 4 years ago when Donald Trump won, and, sitting here as a government relations person, we were all pontificating, gosh, I wonder what's the Democratic or what's the Republican Party going to look like in a year? Because you had 3 Republican parties. You had the GOP, you had the Tea Party, and now you have the new Trump Party. This time 4 years ago, that was the smallest sliver. If you remember, there weren't that many Republicans who stepped up for him while he was running in 2016. But he, within a year, certainly 2 years, the Republican Party was all his, and it still is. And you can still sense that from the fact that they are so quiet. They know he is going to continue to be very powerful within the Republican Party. And the expect him to go quietly in the night, I don't know if you mean like, is he, the White House part? We don't think that he's going to have to be forcibly removed from the White House if it comes to that. There is some speculation that if, by Christmas, we'll be so far down the line that if it's, that all the options for President Trump to overturn 3 states are exhausted, he might just, he goes down to Mar-a-Lago for Christmas and he might just stay there. We don't know that he'd go to the inauguration. I think first of all, there is COVID, but he is the president. The 2 sides. Number one, he hates being out of the spotlight. So to stay home from the inauguration, he'd be out of the spotlight. But when he is in the spotlight, he wants to be number 1, and he wouldn't be number 1 that day. It would be Joe Biden's day. So we don't know. But I don't know that he will have to be forcibly removed. But again, anything can happen. But that's what we feel. And then the number 8, we're assuming the Republicans hold on to a small majority in the Senate. What legislative priorities do you expect can get passed? And will there be another stimulus package? I think we've mentioned some of those already. I think that, there will be bipartisan support to do an infrastructure package. And also retirement. There's you might be familiar with last year, this time they passed what was called the Secure Act to expand retirement legislation. Again, I won't bore you with that, but they both in the Senate and the House have both, they passed through the House, I believe, and the Senate will take it up next year, called Secure 2.0, that will expand retirement even more. They will work on issues like that. And as far as the stimulus package, they're back at it again. I guess I said I was going to end on this too. They're back at it again, and there are still so many gaps between the Republicans and Democrats. And, I'm a nonpartisan. I'm not affiliated with either party. So to sit back and listen to, we have to get something done. We absolutely have to. But we're not going to move off of 2.2 trillion, and we're not going to move off of 500 billion. That's the same argument that they've been making for 6 months. So what is, they have literally, I think as of today, have like 10 days in session. The Democrats are supposed to leave on December 10th, and I think the Senate on the 17th. So what magic wand is going to happen? What magic bean are they going to plant between now and then? I don't know, but they need to get off their duffs and do something, because the few provisions that are left in the CARE Act, those expire on December 31st. But but they both have their arguments right now. I mean, the Democrats are looking at it from what's going on right now. With every day we're exceeding the number of COVID cases. Deaths are going up. Hospitals are getting overflow. So those are real, and so that's what's needed right now. Whereas the Republicans specifically, like what we've heard from McConnell saying, hey, but you know what? Economic numbers aren't so bad. Labor numbers aren't so bad. GDP isn't so bad. And, Moderna and Pfizer have a vaccine coming, so it's going to be fixed sooner than later. So, you can see the validity in both of those arguments and like why they won't back down. So I do think we need something. I know that the Republicans, and here are kind of some of the other question marks in my head when it comes to the Republicans, is that specifically from Mitch McConnell, he's putting this $500 billion bill out, which he did before, that did not get passed, and it had education, healthcare, unemployment, stimulus, a lot of the more money for the Paycheck Protection Program. But it did not have money for the state and locals, and it did not have the stimulus checks. Whereas this time he said, no, we're going to give money to state and locals and stimulus. So I don't know how that $500 billion could hold all that, without cutting significantly into the other programs. So, but, right after the election, he did say that he would consider going to $1 trillion. Which the market's like, but then he reversed course. So I think he would go to $1 trillion. I just don't know if the Democrats would cut their package in half to get there as well. So those are it for the questions, and we're right up on the hour. So
Susan, if I can, I've got two other questions real quick. One is,
you got it.
There's concern about Joe Biden's age and health. Do we have to worry about a President Harris in the next 2 or 3 years?
I mean, it's age is age, right? I mean, there a lot more can go wrong as the older you get, and he'll be 78 this month. So yes, there is always concern about that, but frankly, there is with President Trump as well. He has he's full of energy, but he's not in the best of shape. Where Biden is probably in better shape, but doesn't have the energy. So there's always concern there. But I know specifically if we're talking about Joe Biden, his health records are good. There is always the on the campaign trail that he wasn't mentally fit, but he sounded just fine. He has done fine. But yeah, I mean, that's always a concern, regardless of presidency, whether it's due to health or assassination or anything. But we're not wringing our hands about that in DC. That's kind of the bottom line.
The other one question, just real quickly. Are there any Biden plans that have a chance of passing to reduce or eliminate student college debt?
Yeah, I think that is on his list of priorities. Whether or not that makes it in the first 100 days, I don't know. But there have been proposals specifically in the Democrats' bill, in their COVID package. They do have some student debt relief written into that, and I do believe that it is that writing $10,000 off of student debt, and Republicans would be in favor for. They had student debt provisions in theirs as well, not writing off $10,000, but definitely giving some relief there. So I think there could be some bipartisan work around student loan relief in a Biden administration, and if he had a Republican Senate, I think that could be a bipartisan measure as well. And that was a very important issue during, and I was doing this during the Obama years. We were actually involved in Obama's student loan roundtable, where a lot of these ideas were floated. Then they kind of got killed with the Trump administration, but I bet a lot of these come back. And again, there's certainly moderate Republican and Democrat support for that. Again, you'd have to worry about the fringes of both parties. Your far right Republicans wouldn't want to do it, and for your far left progressives, it would never be big enough.
Well, thank you. As expected, you crammed a lot of information in an hour, and we very much appreciate it. I think you can take a breath now, maybe get a drink of water.
Yeah.
You did a great job, and we really appreciate it. For all of you that are on this call still, we have several questions Susan wasn't able to get to. Susan, if it's okay, can I forward those to you and then you reply? And we will get everyone's questions addressed. I would just want to remind everybody the next in this series of webinars will be the first Wednesday in December. That day at noon, we're going to have with us the lead chief market strategist for First Trust, a major investment firm. His name's Bob Carey. He's going to be here to outline where he sees the best opportunities for us to be investing and where the biggest risks are in the year ahead. I'm sure that's something all of you have a great interest in, and we would like you to participate. So when the emails come out, please register. And with that, we want to tell you thank you. We hope you'll all have a safe and happy Thanksgiving. And Susan, once again, we appreciate all that Natixis does for us. And we appreciate your insights. So thank you very much for being here today.
Thank you for having me. And have a safe and happy Thanksgiving to everybody.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.